with fantasy teams. It's not that I don't like them or understand them, I just have a really bad tendency to forget about them entirely. So, in an attempt to make myself more responsible, I am going to start sharing my fantasy picks for the international figure skating competitions for this season with you, my faithful followers. Now, we're one competition into the International Grand Prix season already, so forgive me for not getting up my picks for NHK Trophy. However, I did make them and fared pretty decently, made some good choices, some not so good choices, but we'll see if we can do a little bit better this week for Skate Canada. Let's dive right in with the ladies in the A category. I went with the Canadian over maybe my heart choice in this case. I went with Cynthia Phaneuf, who will be competing at home, over the American Alyssa Sisney, who has had some great success internationally in the past. I'm just not quite sure where she is consistently so far this season. So Cynthia Phaneuf is my pick in the A category. She seems to be the top international lady at this event. In the B category, I went with a little bit of experience over youth. I went with Sarah Meyer. She's a lovely skater who has had her chances. She's been so close to the top a few times, hasn't quite broken through. She'll be competing against a youngster from Japan that in Haruka Imai. I had to look at that name for a second. But Sarah will be competing against the young Japanese skater who has a lot of talent, but I went with experience in this category, so I went with Sarah Meyer. And in the C category, this was a tough one for me. There are two Americans in this category that really have the potential to pull it off this weekend and be the big surprise. Alexi Gillis was the choice I eventually made, but I went back and forth between Alexi Gillis and the youngster, Agnes Zawadzki, for the U.S. She is coming off of a competition earlier this season where her short program score would have had her in first place at NHK last weekend, so it was very difficult for me to not pick her here, but I feel like Alexi has a lot going for her, and again, the experience factor may play in. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Agnes will be the dark horse everyone expects her to be and jump up in the standings at the end of this competition, but I went with Alexi. The pairs competition at Skate Canada this weekend won't be quite as predictable, with Dubé and Davison, the top Canadian team, out due to a knee injury that Davison suffered in practice, so that left only one option in the A category for the pairs teams this weekend, and so I went with the Russians, the one and only option. I'm not even going to try to say their name because I would really have to brush up on my Russian before I even attempted it. But the Russians will be kind of the top team now that Dubé and Davison are out, so naturally they are the one and only option. Not tough to figure that one out. In the B category, I went with the other Canadian team of Megan Duhamel and Eric Radford. They're a new team this season. Megan contemplated retirement and I think actually did retire for like 3 days or something before she decided that despite losing her partner at the end of the season, she wanted to continue skating. So she teamed up with a longtime friend in Eric Radford, and I really hope they do well this season. And then in the C category, this was another one that there wasn't a clear standout, so I went with another young American team. I seem to be picking a lot of American and Canadian teams, but hopefully that works out well for me. In this category, I went with Marissa Castilli and Simon Schnapier for the U.S., and they're a young team that has a lot of promise, and I hope that they compete well here in Canada, not just for my fantasy team, but for the rest of their season as well. The men's A category was a tricky one for me. There are three guys here: Patrick Chan from Canada, Nobunari Oda from Japan, and Adam Rapon from the USA. And all three of them, on any given day, could win the entire competition. However, Nobunari has a tendency to be a little bit sporadic at times. Adam Rapon doesn't have a ton of international experience, so I went with Patrick Chan skating at home in Canada, and he tends to really rake in the program component scores. I like what I've seen from him so far in preseason events and that sort of thing, so I went with the hometown favorite here in Patrick Chan. And in the B category, I also picked another Canadian. This may be a little bit of a risky choice over Alban Préaubert of France. But I went with Kevin Reynolds. He's a younger kid who has really just kind of begun to come into his own the last couple of years, made some promising improvements, and I'm hoping that being at home will help him skate well here as well. And then in the C category, this one, there wasn't a real standout for me, so I went with a kid who I think has a lot of potential, and I've been very impressed with what I've seen so far. I went with Grant Hochstein of the USA, and I hope that he proves me right in skating well this weekend in Canada. And last but certainly not least, the ice dance category. And this is another event that will be a little bit less interesting for the Canadian fans because reigning Olympic gold medalist Tessa Virtue and Scott Moir are out of this competition due to a bit of a recurring injury that Tessa suffered. Ended up having surgery. They will be out this competition. We'll be back later in the season, but that left things a little bit more wide open. In the A category, I went with the lovable brother-sister team from Great Britain. The Kerrs are my number one pick. They do things a little bit differently, and they really get the crowd into everything that they do, so I think they'll be able to pull it off this weekend. In the B category, another young American team, Madison Chalk and Greg Zerlin for the U.S., and they're a team that is still very young, and they are trying to work their way up into the rankings with some of the top U.S. teams, the Davis and Whites, the Samuelson and Bates, that kind of group there, and I hope to see them do well this season. And then in the C category, I went with, shocker, another Canadian team in Alexandra Paul and Mitchell Islam. Again, not another standout category in this list. It's anyone's game, and with the Olympic champs out, could be a very interesting ice dance competition. And there you have it. I did what I intended to do, and I made my picks on time and with a little bit of thought behind them instead of just last minute picking a few people here and there. So hopefully things work out for me this weekend at Skate Canada. It's always nice to check on the Monday after an event and see how you did, and hopefully you do well. If you make your picks, feel free to comment on the video or on my blog and tell me who you chose and why you chose them, and we'll see who comes out on top this week in fantasy skating. Don't forget to check out Skate Canada this weekend. If you have a subscription to Ice Network, you can subscribe, or you can view the competition live on icenetwork.com. Otherwise, follow me on Twitter, and I will be tweeting updates throughout the weekend from practice tidbits that I hear or see, and then throughout the competition with updates and scores and all of that good stuff as well. So follow me on Twitter @FromTheBoards, and check out my blog, and I will catch you next time.